Hi, I'm Matt from Green Knight Consulting and Coaching. I'm a public speaker, business consultant, as well as a life coach. We named our company Green Knight because of our mission, which is to help people and businesses reach their potential and perhaps succeed beyond their expectations. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is one of the oldest written manuscripts in English history. There are several great lessons in it, and I urge you to read it, or at least look up the Wikipedia version so you can get the main ideas. But one of the lines in this archaic poem is, "True men can but try." Of course, today by that we mean all humankind. But it is a message that reverberates down through time. One that teaches us and stresses to us the honor, the glory, the fulfillment, which is critical to all of us if we want to live the life and be the person that we resolve to be. This fulfillment comes from the effort itself, the noble battle that defines our existence and means our life was well spent. I'll tell you another story. He was born to a mother who dropped out of high school to have him. His parents were married at 16 and 18. One of his earliest memories was growing up in Gary, Indiana, basically a far poor suburb of Chicago. He remembers watching Wonder Woman prime time with Linda Carter with his little brothers, as well as his parents one time, and a huge rat comes staggering out from under the chair his mother's sitting in, drunk on rat poison. His mother immediately jumps straight up onto her chair and starts screaming. His dad, as a quick thinker, grabs a hammer, smashes the rat on his head. He remembers his little brothers being fascinated by the brains and the blood splattered all over the carpet. He remembers, though, that he slept with the covers over his head until about the age of 26 because he was still afraid of being bitten by rats and could not break the habit. He wasn't a very popular kid. He got beat up a lot. One adult who seemed to like him was his next-door neighbor, Gus. He was always over at Gus's house until one day his dad said, "You can't play at Gus's anymore." He later found out that was because Gus, his neighbor, shot and killed an intruder. Back then, the teachers thought he was mentally handicapped. His dad got a better job and they moved to a lower middle-class suburb. At the new school, they gave him an IQ test at the end of year 3. He tested out as a second-year university student. Of course, if you ask him, he believes that those tests are subjective and only indicative. But obviously, there was something there. So they diagnosed him as a hyperactive child, similar to what you'd call ADHD today. They started him on Ritalin, which back then was an experimental medication. He was prescribed 135 milligrams a day to start. Recommended starting dosage today is 5 milligrams, never to exceed 60 milligrams. He started having hallucinations from it. The doctors thought his hallucinations were just an overactive imagination, which they chalked up to ADHD. So they kept upping it. He can't remember how high the dosage went, but it was high. A couple years after this, and things stabilized slightly. Then his mother probably saved his life, pulling him out of the house by his hair because he wouldn't pay attention, while their house was burning down. After a short stint as homeless, couch surfing with 3 kids, his parents got back on their feet. Not long after that, his father went on strike and lost his job. He worked 2 menial labor jobs at the same time for $3.25 an hour. A mover and also a cashier at a gas station. He opened a roofing company, which failed. His dad tried real estate sales next. He never sold the house except his own. It took a few years before he could find one full-time job, making half of what he did before he went on strike. He stayed at this job for the next 26 years. Anyway, about this time, he ended up getting Coke bottle glasses and developed asthma so bad he couldn't take gym. He got beat up regularly in school, at least a couple times a week, in a good week. A couple examples. He remembers one time the Kirkman brothers, both of them 3 or 4 years older, beating him up on the way home from school, leaving him in a snowbank bleeding. His father came out in the car and found him when it got close to dark. Another time they pelted him with tomatoes. He remembers another time that the Wynn brothers came to his door, knocked on it and said, "We're here to kick your son's butt." Of course, they didn't say butt. His dad had him come out and fight both of them at the same time, even though they were 3 or 4 years older. He remembers trying to drown one of them in the rain catch they had by the gutter. The fight finally ends when one of the brothers is holding his arms, the other one sitting on his chest, punching him in the face. At about 15 or 16, he decided he got tired of getting beat up and shoved into lockers all the time, So finally he decided he wasn't going to have this problem anymore. He read about Theodore Roosevelt, President of the United States in the early 1900s, who was a very sickly child with Coke bottle glasses, big buck teeth, and an annoying voice, and asthma, but whose dad was rich and built him a gym, and Theodore Roosevelt trained himself out of asthma. So he figured, why not? Why not try to train out of it without the rich dad in the gym? So one day he started doing push-ups. He did 3 or 4 and promptly had an asthma attack. His parents had to take him to the emergency room to get an adrenaline shot. The next day he did it again. He did 4 or 5 push-ups, another rush to the hospital, another adrenaline shot. Next day he did a couple more, but he didn't need an adrenaline shot. He did this every day, bit by bit improvement, and 2 or 3 times a week he'd have to go to the hospital. Finally his dad said, forget it. I ain't doing this anymore. I ain't taking the hospital anymore. You're doing this to yourself. His mom, however, was kind of more attached to him and didn't want to play in a funeral, so their parents took him to an allergist. He did an allergy test. If you've ever had one, supposedly they put little circles on your arm in ink, and then they put little pricks with allergen on each little circle. Well, when they did this with him, his arm swelled up so bad that he had to do it again. They tried it again. His arm swelled up so bad again. They had to dilute the allergens down 3 times to get useful data. Basically, he was allergic to everything. About this time, he was finishing his Eagle Scout certification. In Australian England, this is called a Queen Scout. In it, you have to organize an Eagle service project where you have to put together a service project plan, submit it to national office, get it approved, and organize hundreds of other individual man-hours to better a community, a church, a school, or a religion. He decided to build a park down by the river out of some overgrown woods. At the age of 15 or 16, he had to get permission from the government, the national headquarters of the Boy Scouts of America, organized large numbers of adults and boys to build this park by clearing the area, disposing of excess wood and refuse, putting in tables, etc., over multiple weekends. The last weekend he was doing this, he was burning out tree stumps. He was pouring petrol on a tree stump when his brother decided to light and throw a lit match on it while he was still pouring. He figured out that day that he was pretty good under pressure when he saw his arm burning, and he realized that his choices were to run around and die or stop, drop, and roll, as the old saying went. He got some pretty bad burns, but because it was winter and he was wearing multiple clothes, sweaters, long johns, etc., it burned off mostly those. He got to use some cool creams and had some cool oozing wounds and looked like a mummy for a while. Remember, for a 16-year-old, this was kind of cool. Anyway, after he healed up, the allergist said, try swimming. It's very good for cardiovascular system, and the moist air is better for your lungs. So he tried out for the high school swim team in year 11. The only problem was he couldn't swim. Luckily, the team was so bad, no one got cut, even if they couldn't swim. They had a huge 8-lane pool with a diving well, but since he couldn't swim, he didn't get to practice in that. Luckily, they also had a little kiddie pool for teaching toddlers to swim, which came up a little bit above his waist. He swam there after a fashion for a month or 6 weeks and then graduated to the normal pool. The other kids swam in the open pool in lanes 1 through 7 based on their skill and speed level. Lane 8 had a lane line, the floating lane lines you see, that he could grab onto, and they made him swim there as the water was over his head, and they still figured he was a drowning risk. The new coach was transitioning to take over that year and wanted to build a great team because the facility was so great. So he would pick this guy up at home and drive him at 5:30 a.m. to another high school to have him practice there as well as practice at his own high school after 3 p.m. By the end of the year, he was one of the best on the team. The next year, he qualified for nationals and swam on a state qualifying time relay team. He ended up captain of the team. He graduated near the top of his class and then applied to West Point Military Academy. He received both a U.S. congressional and U.S. senatorial nomination to attend. Unfortunately, he aced all the exams, physical fitness test, academic tests, but failed the eye test. He ended up getting accepted in less than 2 hours, though, after applying to another one of the most respected military universities in the USA, where the vigilance standard was lower as long as it was correctable. But there was a problem. The university was approximately $35,000 per year, and his dad only made about $50,000. He got some help from his parents, loans from the government, a partial swim scholarship, and a job. But he also had to fulfill his military obligations. His class started out with over 470. It only graduated 174. He was hazed mercilessly because he was still kind of awkward and kind of too dumb to be afraid. Here's an example of how dumb he was. One time, he was being inspected by a Marine Corps Sergeant Major who had done multiple tours in Vietnam, who found a thread on his uniform, who said,
"Boy, your inattention to detail will get men killed."
The Sergeant Major then said,
"Boy, you ever been in any real combat?"
Of course, he was only 18, and he wasn't too bright and kind of a mouth, so he said,
"No, Sergeant Major, but I've seen the reruns."
Now, if you've been in the service, you can imagine how bad his life was for the next few months during this year-long weed-out process. He also joined the boxing team because he was so used to getting beat up that he wasn't that afraid of taking a punch. After a couple years, he ran out of money. He lost his athletic scholarship when he blew out his shoulder. His parents wouldn't pay any longer, and there were no more loans available, so he had to take a year off to earn money himself. He started out as a sales rep in a knife company, going door to door, even though he had no sales experience. He was pretty awkward also, because he'd only asked one girl, out for a date as a friend so far. So here he is, an awkward kid who's got a 50-inch chest and a 28-inch waist, knocking on doors saying, "Ma'am, can I please come in and show you my knives?" You can imagine how well that went over and the level of rejection received. Anyway, within 10 weeks, he was promoted to field sales manager, a trainer, then an assistant manager, then an office manager. Within 8 months, he was in charge of recruiting, training, and managing over 91 salespeople, an assistant manager, 3 receptionists, and as well as a half a dozen key staff. He made enough money that year to pay in the entire academic year in full. He got a partial academic scholarship also, which was enough to cover the in-state tuition, but he was out of state, so the tuition was a lot more. He went back to university, lost 23 kilograms to get back in shape for swimming and the boxing team. The next summer, he worked in the previous business and earned enough commissions and management bonuses to pay for the final year of university. He graduated #1 in the science department. After he left the military institute, he went to the previous company and was the #2 branch in the company out of over 100. He was promoted to district manager 3.5 months after branch manager. Now he was in charge of multiple locations. He had the highest productivity per representative in the company out of tens of thousands of representatives in over 300 plus offices. He got his heart broke a couple times when he thought he was going to get married a couple times, just like most people. He was pretty well off, but lost almost all of it when the tech bubble burst. He was promoted to territory development manager 4 years later. He set up operations in a foreign country, broke multiple sales records in that time. On April Fool's Day 1996, ironically, he became the victim of identity theft. This went on for 25 years. He still has problems with it. Some of the problems he had included the U.S. tax office chasing him for $470,000 US that was fraudulent, and the ATO chasing him for $300,000, which was also a result of the identity theft. This identity theft extended to 3 continents and ended up being well over $1.5 million. When the guilty party was caught, the thief tried to say he was in on it. Even though he was completely innocent, he had to be held in custody, interviewed, and was investigated by federal police. The perpetrator was in prison for less than a year. When he got out, the identity theft started all over again. During this time, he was promoted to division manager in charge of 3 states, grew a business from 0 locations to 13 locations in less than 2 years, with over $5 million in turnover. He was promoted to national sales manager 2 years later and grew the business to 31 locations around the country. He tried to convince the owners and the board of directors to make changes to the structure of compensation and method of recruiting workers. The owners were unwilling to make these changes, and as a result, undertakings were made by the ACCC. He kept the business going despite this and had the best staff retention and sales volume in the company. He left the business to start his own business in an unrelated industry and grew it to 13 locations around Australia in 3 years and became a multimillionaire. However, he was cheated on a huge deal in China for somewhere around $750,000 to $1 million in stock. This caused a real downward spiral in the business due to having stock that was unsellable. This caused big issues with the distributors he had because he ended up supporting them financially, so he became their creditor instead of their support network, which of course soured relations. Basically, again, he lost it all. After that, he met a nice lady, lost 30 kilograms to make her happy. Then he had an eye surgery that he had back in 1994 go bad. The doctors told him his vision would continue deteriorating until he went blind. He went to one of the best eye doctors in the entire world at the Mayo Clinic in Chicago. They told him it was a lost cause. He then got an appointment with a doctor in Florida that was actually considered the best in the world in this area, and she gave him a glimmer of hope. She referred him to one of her colleagues in Australia who was able to stabilize the deterioration with a new experimental procedure. The problem still exists, but with advances in medicine, there is hope that when it gets bad again, the corneal transplants may allow him to see after the 2-year recovery period for each eye. A few years later, he decided to have children. His wife had a miscarriage after a couple years. It took 7 more years to have their first child. Meanwhile, in the business, he weathered the GFC in 2008. It took years to get back to zero. Once he was back to zero, he opened an overseas factory as well that successfully exported to 26 countries in Africa, North America, Europe, Asia, and Oceania. During this, he had 4 tax audits, a Fair Work Ombudsman issues, a key employee embezzle over $250,000, and 2 other workers embezzle $100,000 each. He had consumer affair tribunals and was as much as $2.7 million in debt. He traded out of it. But he also had his first child at 48. Then he had a minor stroke at 49. He figured it out when one of his eyes was pointing in the wrong direction. He got diabetes. He lost 40 kilograms, and he sold out of the business by the age of 50, ending up a multi-millionaire again. Then he decided he wanted to return to his roots and have a life of service, because that was the only time he felt fulfilled and happy. So he started a public speaking company and a training company because it was what he enjoyed the most and where he felt he could impact the most people in a positive way. He also hosts 2 radio shows, one on business, and the other, his favorite one, is one that focuses on changing the world for the better by focusing on leadership, cultural trends, taking personal responsibility, and focusing on what each of us can do for the betterment of all. He also does stand-up comedy 2 or 3 times a week. Of course, this person is me. Why do I tell you all this? Because I love to talk about myself? Because I love the sound of my own voice? Well, maybe. I mean, I am American after all. But more importantly, from your point of view, I'm standing here telling you that if a guy who is basically poor white trash can become a multimillionaire, who couldn't ask a girl on a date until he was 26, had no confidence with women until he was in his 40s, and has had multiple long-term relationships with models, women with master's degrees, and the second-place bodybuilder in Australia before he was well off and looked like this. If a kid with asthma is so bad that he couldn't even take PE, could qualify for nationals in a cardiovascular sport and end all his medications, run a marathon, and max out the U.S. Army physical fitness test only 3 years after he was well enough to start taking gym again. If a kid who seemed mentally disadvantaged can graduate at the top of his class from one of the highest ranking universities in a country of 300 million, if a guy can come back from 2.7 million in debt to be well off again without declaring bankruptcy, without borrowing $1 from a bank, if someone can manage ongoing identity theft for 25 years, If a guy can have his first kid at 48, if a guy with no finance and no formal business training can start from scratch a nationwide business in an industry where he had zero experience, in a foreign country that turned to operational profit from day one in all 5 states, then shortly after open a factory in China where he doesn't speak the language, without finance or loans from third parties, and zero experience in manufacturing, and then export to 26 countries successfully. If a shy 19-year-old can go door to door selling knives when he has a 50-inch chest and a 28-inch waist and says, "Ma'am, can I please come in and show you my knives?" If this same guy can get to a point where in his 30s, in international trade fairs, he can sell by basically saying, "Hi, you just met me. I don't speak your language. I'm American. Your country traditionally doesn't like us. You're going to go back to your home country and have no recourse if I cheat you. But can I have $80,000? You can do what you want. You can reach the objectives you wish. I'm nothing special. I'm not Nelson Mandela. I'm not Bill Gates. I'm not Jeff Bezos, nor am I Barack Obama or Albert Einstein. I'm a normal guy standing in front of you telling you that it can be done. I can, and I want to show you the way. I've been at the bottom where I'm afraid to answer the phone because of collection agents. I've been at the top where it seems like I could do nothing wrong. I understand feeling like it's you against the world. The frustration of feeling like you're banging your head against the wall and don't understand why things are going so badly. I know the siren song and the lure of victim philosophy. It can help you fight against it. I also know that there are 2 kinds of people listening to me right now. Actually, there's probably a lot of people not listening to me anymore right now. But one kind of person who is listening to me right now is saying, "That's a great story." Or maybe they're saying it's not so great. They're saying, "He's kind of full of himself, isn't he?" Or "He just got lucky." Or "He doesn't understand that I can't succeed because..." And the other kind of person is saying, "Well, if that guy can do it and he's nothing special, he might be able to help me. He might be able to show me the way. Or maybe I can figure it out on my own." And it's time to do it. It's time to have the success I want. It's time to have the life I want. It's time to have the fulfillment I want. I'll do it. The real question is, which kind of person are you?